He was subjected to the most unimaginable suffering at the hands of people who were supposed to care for him. Arthur Labinjo-Hughes died at the hands of his stepmother after spiteful and sadistic abuse meted out by her and his father.
Arthur, are you going to play for England? No, why not?
After when I play for Liverpool, I can play for Tottenham.
So you're going to play for Liverpool, then Tottenham. What about England?
The little boy was murdered just 2 months after social workers found no evidence of safeguarding concerns after his grandmother, Joanne Hughes, had alerted them to bruises on his back. She also contacted the police. It was the people who were supposed to care for him who killed him, but Miss Hughes said it was clear that Arthur was failed by the very authorities that we, as a society, are led to believe are there to ensure the safety of everyone.
We need to talk about Arthur as a child who had visible injuries, who had visible needs, who had said he was suffering, but who wasn't listened to by those who are trained to listen to a child and to impute what they're not capable of saying. So it's Arthur's experiences weren't translated into a way in which the protection system stepped in.
While it's important to avoid drawing conclusions until a serious case review has been completed, it's not the first time a child's trauma has gone unnoticed.
Social workers have been found to have high caseloads. They're spending a lot of time on computers, recording, and often using, quite unfriendly, clunky sort of electronic systems. And the effect of this is that it reduces the amount of time that workers have to actually invest in the face-to-face work, in going out and spending quality time with children. And in addition to that, there's the highly stressful, anxiety-provoking nature of the work. And in so many of these cases, the parents are angry, they're intimidating, they make it plain that they don't want social workers involved with them.
It's not a well-paid professional.
Professor Jo Delahunty QC specialises in child protection.
Social workers do this job because they genuinely want to make the lives better of the families and the children they work for. I think they are optimistic about capacity for a change. They know that the care system is not a panacea. We don't have enough foster carers, we don't have enough placements within location for children, and family members are too often discounted as alternative carers. So anyone that knows how the care system works will know that we use the term care with some degree of concern, because care too often can't be given by strangers and can't be given by an underfunded system.
Arthur was killed during the first lockdown, and the role it played will come into question. Data from the ONS suggests serious child harm cases reported by councils in England rose by nearly 20% during the first year of the pandemic, although these figures do need to be interpreted with caution. And they're the cases registered. Throughout the pandemic, Newsnight has reported on concerns that vulnerable children had slipped from view, with normal life coming to a halt and early warning systems being disrupted during lockdowns. Was abuse more likely to have gone unseen behind closed doors?
Social workers did go into family homes, and there was an obligation to socially distance when they were in those homes. So really important questions will need to emerge from this serious case review into Arthur's situation about just what were the dynamics that went on when social workers did visit this home during lockdown. Many families in high-risk cases didn't send their children to school. So the option of seeing children like Arthur in the school environment wasn't available. And it's probably the most fundamental key good practice issue in high-risk situations like this, is that children need to be seen on their own.
The failings and processes that led to Arthur's tragic death will be reviewed and discussed by professionals, but those family members who tried to raise concerns and are now left behind with their grief and pain will need to have their voices heard and be supported too.
Deb Cohen. I'm joined now by Sir Alan Wood, the former president of the Association of Directors of Children's Services. I'm also joined on the line by Anna Edmundson, Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the NSPCC, Debbie Innes-Turnill, a lecturer in the Department of Social Work and Social Care at the University of Birmingham, and Jim Gamble, a former Chief Police Officer, currently the Independent Child Safeguarding Commissioner for the City of London and Hackney. Good evening to you all. First of all, Jim Gamble, there were multiple warnings about Arthur's situation, one of which came from his grandmother, who was a secondary school teacher who called an emergency number. It is hard to see this as anything other than a failing of the services.
Well, I think we need to wait for the outcome of whatever review there is. And having said that, you could probably write the review now. But ultimately, you're dealing with two highly manipulative individuals. What you see here classically is disguised compliance. So once there was a complaint came in, I'm not sure that we won't find out that there was some ambiguity about the leadership between police, social services and schools, that lockdown, whilst contextually important, of course, is not an excuse. But we're talking about people who minimise, self-justify and blame others, who tell the school, no, he can't come in, but he's in the garden, he's having a great time. When the social workers come round, we'll have to wait and see, did they come unannounced? Did they speak to the child by themselves?
Well, that's a very good point, Jim Gunn. I want to just pick that up with you. How likely is it that social workers speak to a 6-year-old themselves?
Well, it's highly likely. I mean, I'm involved in a number of boroughs across London in multi-agency safeguarding arrangements, and I'm not making excuses. This is awful. You know, there's a river of tears flows from this. But in the vast majority, in the hundreds of thousands of cases that are run through month after month, quarter after quarter, social workers are spotting nuance. Well, they are intervening. They're engaging with children.
Let me just pick. Yeah, but sometimes it does go wrong. But Sir Alan, is that your understanding that the majority of times social workers will be in the room and asked to speak alone to the child?
Well, the skill of the social worker is to ensure they're finding out the child's opinion and the child's views. But it's not always easy. Parents or other relatives will insist on being in the room.
So they can't. There could be no insistence of leaving the room so they can speak to the child.
No, not with any. You know, their skill is to do that. But it's not a, you know.
Well, Debbie Innes-Turnill, you're an educator in social work and social care, and presumably what you're drumming into your students is to be curious, to go the extra mile, to be sceptical, to try and speak to the child on their own.
That's absolutely what we do. And to be clear, I was a primary school teacher for 26 years, and I was a designated safeguarding lead, and we often facilitated situations so social workers could speak to children on their own. But as Jim said, it's not always that easy for social workers to get into a room with a child on their own, particularly if they're visiting a home where parents can be, as these two parents have been described as.
They don't have power. Well, let me just, there's two things in that. Some people will be surprised that social workers don't have the power to do that. That's the first thing I want to ask you. And the second thing, if you were 23 years a primary school teacher, we know that for about a year, Arthur was fixated on saying that his father wanted to kill him, and he had told various people that, including, I understand, at the school. It's inconceivable to me that a child of 6 would be so manipulative as to make that up consistently.
And in my experience, the child wouldn't, but it's really difficult to point fingers at individual professionals here. For me, the problem is that the system is not working. Social workers, schools are under a significant amount of pressure. There is not enough funding, caseloads are too high, and as a result, thresholds are too high, and therefore children who are very vulnerable get missed, and it's not right. But we need to fund the system better, and we need to fix the broken parts of the system where social workers are required to fill in multiple and complex forms rather than actually doing the work with the children, which is what they want to do.
Anna Edmundson, how often do we have to hear, no criticism of course, but how often do we have to hear that, you know, social workers are overworked, the caseloads are too high, there's too much paperwork to fill in. The system, if the system has been working for so long, and my goodness, I only mentioned Baby P in Victoria, Columbia, I could mention many, many more. If the system isn't working, why has it been such a low priority?
It's a very good question, and I think that the change that we need to see after Arthur's horrific and tragic death is exactly that. We want to see at the NSPCC the kind of political leadership and change, including investment in the system that Debbie was talking about, including implementation of the kind of recommendations that Sir Alan has made, and a real focus on joining up the safeguarding partners work that the government can do. We've got a health and care bill that's going through Parliament next week. There'll be new integrated care systems. There's a golden opportunity for some real political leadership here so that we don't keep seeing these cases.
Alan Wood, we know from Deb's film, we had the statistic that there has been more referrals and worry about vulnerable children during lockdown. Mm-hmm. And of course, the possibility is that we have another lockdown. I mean, do you think social services and police at the time, at the start of the lockdown and through it, were so alert that there would be, in those confined spaces, more chance of abusive behaviour?
I think the lockdown came as, you know, a significant pressure on lots of public services. I think in many respects the way in which the police, health providers and social workers in local government responded was, as Harry Ferguson said, very positive, and they tried their best to super prioritise the cases that they had to visit the homes. You know, the lockdown created a situation in many respects where some of the blockages in the system were removed. So there was a streamlining of processes between agencies, for example. The disappearance of continuous and long-winded meetings meant that people could focus much more sharply on decision making. But the system is, as colleagues have said, under significant stress and pressure.
And a lot of children who'd maybe displayed now and then because they went to school now and then were actually closed away from the system.
I think that's absolutely right. A large number of children who otherwise may have been coming to attention of the system did not come to the attention of the system, and it's now beginning to rectify itself.
Jim Gamble, is there a reluctance on the part of social workers to be preemptive perhaps and take a child into care?
Well, I think there's always a reluctance. I think social work is such that there's a priority very often about keeping, you know, the child in the family. And I often reflect on the fact that, you know, care has been demonized to such a degree that it's not often considered as the positive option it could be. And there's lots of other issues. But I often think of Jenny Malloy, who wrote the book, The Hackney Child, who went into care herself. And she said to me, you know, my worst day in care was better than my best day at home. So it's about looking at all the tools and all the options that are available. And let me just say this. I'm not saying, you know, we shouldn't hold people to account. Professional safeguarding is a business, and it's the business of keeping children safe. What I'm saying is we shouldn't become involved in blame. The problem for me about these reviews is from Dennis O'Neill in 1945, the whole way through to Arthur, we see the same issues about miscommunication, ambiguity of leadership. And the leadership that really worries me is the leadership of central government, and this government in particular, because we go through this musical chair of reviews. So we play the musical chairs game, whether it be probation service, whether it be children's social care, adult social care, you know, the dilution of policing over the last 10 years. And we are paying a price for that. Yeah. We have a multi-agency environment that's under huge pressure, where they are demonized when something goes wrong and ignored, you know, before the fact, and after the fact, when we're in the eye of the storm, suddenly we're looking at those professionals.
Yes, and we say it is like Groundhog Day, and I absolutely accept that. But there is something, Alan Wood, there is still no legal requirement on people working with children in England, nor Scotland, nor Northern Ireland to report known or suspected child abuse or neglect, though there is guidance telling them to do so. But there is no legal requirement to do so. Is that not a failure? Is that not something that should be addressed?
No, I don't think simply making it a legal requirement will actually change a significant amount at all, because that assumes that there's lots and lots of things that don't get reported. My view is that the system is not so broken as people make out. The processes in the main do work, and children are provided with the appropriate services. It's the areas where they don't work, which often come down to multi-agency working and decision making by individuals in that situation, that we still have to think about and work harder on to resolve. But I think we mustn't give the impression that somehow the whole national system is falling to bits. It's not.
No, and nobody disputes the fact that social workers have a very complex, delicate and difficult job. But I want to ask you again, Debbie, Innes-Turnill, on that. On this question of, do you think social workers would rather, and in fact it was clear, that they actually had a legal responsibility to report rather than guidance on that? Because at least then it would be clear that, you know, if they made a mistake, the mistake would at least be that they had reported it and it could be investigated.
I think none of the professionals I work with, and I work with social work students, I work with social workers, I work with schools, none of those people would not make a referral or report some abuse if they thought it was happening. I don't think making it a legal requirement will make any difference to that. I think we have to look, and the colleagues that I work with talk about increasing thresholds and lack of funding for early help programs, which will support lots of families in order for children to stay in the home. And they'll also report that there are a lack of foster carers, and the care system is creaking under the strain of increasing numbers of children being taken into care. So, you know, I would dispute the fact that the system is working in the main. I think professionals do their job in the main very, very well, but it needs to be funded better, and it needs to have more people doing the job, being the eyes and the ears on the ground, and protecting people for Arthur.
I mean, Anna, we know that people did call out about Arthur's situation. We know that Arthur called out repeatedly about his own situation. Presumably there are many children that you know tonight and in future are simply not even able to do that, and I don't have anyone calling out for them.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important that really safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. Yeah. That all the adults around a child need to keep their ears and eyes open, and if they've got any concerns, to reach out and ask for help, either from the relevant authorities, or we have the NSPCC helpline. But it's really important that whether it's an engineer going into a home to check the gas, or a takeaway driver, that everybody uses this as a bit of a wake-up call and thinks what they can do to try and raise the alarm when they have got concerns.
And finally, Jim Gamble, I read out that bit from the UN Convention on the Child. Should we be prioritising children above all else? I mean, tonight Boris Johnson said he'll leave no stone unturned to sort this out. But are we really prioritising children enough?
No, I don't think we are, and I think the system does lack funding. For example, I would rather, in this world where we can talk over Zoom without me having to travel to London, that we learn from that. So do we really need a high-speed rail system between two cities, and the billions and billions of pounds and the billions of pound overspend that have gone into that? Or would that money be better diverted into children and adolescents' mental health, into how we intervene earlier with parents, into how we support social services and policing across the board? I think that's where our priority should lie. And if Boris Johnson's listening, you know, and actually hears, then he can demonstrate that he's done both those things by changing his priority and by putting more money where it's needed in the front line.
Thank you all very much indeed.